faster it'll be in my purse or in the refrigerator. What? You're going out of town with your friends? You can just leave that here. Learn one thing, guys. Don't tell the truth. Don't tell the truth. Fuck the truth. The truth never kept anybody together, ever. Lies keep you together. Lies enhance your relationship. They enhance your love. Get out of that bed every morning and go, still love you, honey. Oh, am I glad I got married? I wish I didn't have to work so I could stay here and fuck you all day. Gotta go. I mean, lie, man. Lie your ass off. You're as pretty as when we met. Love ya. You'll stay together for 50 years. You start doing that truth shit. Oh, man. Oh, it's the toughest. It's the worst. You don't want to do that, folks. It's tough to make it work, man. Relationships are a bench. I don't know. I've had a share. Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to figure out what makes each other come.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Management of the Absurd Wednesday, April the 10th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and a new book, Management of the Absurd. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
It's a long way to Tipperary. It's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Staten Island. Farewell to Times Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, and my heart's right there. Into New York City came an Irishman one day to stay with friends from Ireland who had found good work and pay, singing songs of Dublin, Mayo, Cork and Donegal. Young Paddy got nostalgic and he said to one and all, it's a long way to Tipperary. It's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the
Thank you. And now a little bit of Mafia action.
Anytime you put anything in front of your family, it's going to hurt. Even when you think you're doing the right thing for your family because, hey, I'm a good provider. I'm making sure they're comfortable. Okay, but that doesn't replace the relationship, the bond that you have with your family. Hey everyone, Michael Francis here. And for the past 3 or 4 years or so on YouTube, I've been telling a lot of mob stories, and I think people enjoyed hearing it. And I want to make it clear, I never glorify the life. I try my best not to do that. And the reason for that, I've always said it's really a bad life. And why is it a bad life? Because I don't know any family of any member of that life that hasn't been totally devastated, including my own. Any lifestyle that does that to a family is just not a good life. I want to clear some things up here with me. When I got into the life really in the early 70s, it was basically to help my father. Around the same time, I was with a young woman that I eventually married in 1975, the same year that I took the oath and became a made guy. And the problem for me is that becoming the best possible mob guy, making the most money that I possibly could, was more important to me than really concerning myself with my family. Now, I wanted to provide for them, don't get me wrong. I wanted to take care of them, wanted to do all the right things, but I didn't realize how much time that was taking away from my relationship with my then wife and eventually my 3 children. And that went on for a number of years. And I was very successful in that life. People know my history. I did a lot of great things, made a tremendous amount of money, took care of my family. They had everything. We had boats. We had houses in 3 different places. I had a house that was almost 10,000 square feet with a racquetball court and everything, 2 acres of land. We had it all. But I was drifting away from my family because being the best possible guy and supporting my family was more important to me than actually spending time with my family. I was so driven in that regard. What happened as a result? Well, that marriage didn't work out. Eventually we grew apart and eventually divorced. And sometimes things just don't work out. We understand that. But really, the real tragedy for me was the relationship with my children. And even until today, all these years later, 2 of my daughters that reside across country in New York, relationship has never been really repaired, never been the same. As a result of that, relationship with my grandchildren has suffered. And that's hurtful. And, I attribute that again to my being so driven to take care of them in one way that we drew ourselves apart. A prime example of somebody wanting to be the best possible business person that they can be would be my father. Now, obviously, his business was organized crime. But what was so important for my dad, he wanted to be known as, a guy that's going to die with his boots on. He would never talk to the government. He would always be stand-up his whole life. It meant so much to him. His legacy in that life meant so much to him. Like some of us, our legacy in our business meant so much. Well, my dad did die with his boots on at the age of 103. Never cooperated with the government, did 40-some-odd years in prison. There was no way that he was ever going to do that. But, an interesting thing, I had a conversation with my father. He was back in prison again on one of his many violations. And my mom had just passed away in 2012. And I was sitting with my dad, and I had been a little upset with him because after his 3rd violation, I said to him, Dad, you can't stay in New York. I know, this life is important to you, but our family is falling apart. My brother had a drug problem. My sister died of an overdose of drugs. My mother and father were just, growing so far apart. I saw it. And I said, you need to move out of New York. You got to preserve the family. Well, he didn't want to do that. It was more important to him, his legacy. And he said, don't worry about it. I love my family. And he did. No question. He loved his family, loved me, loved his wife. But he didn't understand how he was creating this division between all of us. And so he kept going back to prison. So when we were at this meeting, I said to him, Dad, you're a stand-up guy, but look what you did to your family. He got very upset with me. He said, no, none of this was my fault. I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I was framed on this case. I didn't commit this crime. I'm doing time for a crime that I didn't commit. I said, Dad, I believe that. I'll take that to my grave. I said, but you didn't get framed because you were a doctor, a lawyer, or a priest. You were framed because you were a mobster, and you refused to walk away and take care of your family. Well, he got offended by that, but you know what? It's the truth. He put his life in front of his family life. Now, how many of us do that and suffer in a different way? Obviously, you're not going to prison, but your family is growing apart. Anytime you put anything in front of your family, it's going to hurt. Even when you think you're doing the right thing for your family because, hey, I'm a good provider. I'm making sure they're comfortable. Okay, but that doesn't replace the relationship, the bond that you have with your family. Happened to me. My first family collapsed. I attribute that all to myself. My ex-wife was a good woman. I don't blame her, but she needed more, and I didn't provide it for her. It was really on me. And of course, now I'm married again, and I have a wonderful family, and I was very, very careful not to make that mistake a second time. And I'm doing okay. I have no issues with my life at this point. We're comfortable taking care of my family. But what was more important to me was making sure I had that relationship. Even during my time in prison, what mattered to me was the communication that I had with my wife and our little children so that we wouldn't, I wouldn't make the same mistake and grow apart. And it's worked for me, and I've been able to now be married for 38 years and have a healthy relationship with our 4 children. And, recently, for whatever reason, so many men that have been successful out there, have been driven to do the same thing that I once was driven to do: provide for their family, be the best possible person in their business that they could be, make sure that they were, looked upon as being an upstanding person in the community. But at the same time, the relationship with their family has suffered, and they've grown apart. And that's a terrible thing. That's something that we shouldn't allow to happen in our lives. And I know a lot of the messages and a lot of the comments that I get, men are suffering because of that. They don't want it to happen. They didn't do it intentionally. It's not something that they set out to do. They set out to do the right thing. And in many ways they are, in building their business, providing for their family. But taking that time away from the family is what hurt. And some of these guys feel lost, they really do. They don't know how to get back. They don't know how to repair that relationship. What steps to take to really bring that family back together. Well, I've had a lot of experience with that. And I can tell you, for the last 25 years, I've been encouraging men in all walks of life, to try to obviously be the best possible person that they can be for themselves, but also stressing how important it is to maintain their family relationships. Honestly, if it wasn't for my relationship with my wife, I don't think I'd be the type of person that I am today. I mean, she's helped me. She's encouraged me. The same with my children. It's so important. And for you guys that are missing that, I understand. I can relate. Like I said, it happened to me at one time. And I have a team of men around me that in some ways have experienced the same thing and have the same heart that I do to help, men that might be in your category. And I really mean that. And you know what? There is a way to repair that. Nothing is beyond hope. I mean, normally it's not. Things haven't gotten that far out of hand. You're still good people. You still have good intentions. You still want to do the right thing. Sometimes you just don't know how. Sometimes the separation has been over a period of time that, well, how do I make this work now? How do I put this back together? Well, I've been very keyed in on this, and we've, over a number of years now, have created some great resources, and we've helped a lot of men tremendously, and this is so satisfying to me and to my team. We have wonderful resources. We have programs that we have put together. We have encounters with men, several times, almost daily now. That's how successful this platform, this program has been. So I encourage you, there's a link somewhere here in this video. I encourage you to take a look at some of the resources we offer. See if you're one of those men that I'm talking about. And if it's even clicking in your mind a little bit, then you're one of those men. And people, I got to tell you something, guys. There was nothing more powerful for me than being around a group of men that there was a certain brotherhood created where we can talk to one another, where when we had issues or problems, we can discuss it with one another. Unfortunately, back then, the problems weren't the ones that I'm talking to you about now, but it was still great to have this brotherhood. Well, to have this kind of brotherhood and this relationship with guys that have been there and done that and have successfully turned things around and know how to help you in that regard, it's priceless. And I really mean that. So we want to help you. And if this is something that you think could be helpful to you, there's no shame in it at all, guys. Believe me, there's no shame in seeking help. Hey, I'm 72 years old. When I need advice or I need help, I'm quick to call up a brother and say, hey, I'm struggling a little bit here. I can use your advice or help. There's nothing more important than that.
And that was a little bit of the Mafia. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the patriotic shorts.
When you tell war stories, it's all hindsight, because if you had known what you know now, you probably wouldn't have been in that situation. But in hindsight, I wondered why the commander, because we had excellent communications, why he just didn't do radio communications and tell us where he wanted us to be positioned on this perimeter, instead of separating commanders from their unit with their communications. So it was a bit unsettling, but captains don't question colonels. When the colonel tells you to go, you salute and click your heels and you go. And you lament the fact that it wasn't a very good idea, because 17 young, who knows what they could have been, got killed because of that one bad decision.
The F-35 excels in battle because of its networking abilities, relaying information between its squadron. This is a huge amount of data to transfer between aircraft and allies on the surface, and requires a high data transfer speed. However, communication comes with one glaring problem. It announces your presence to anyone listening. It is vital that stealth planes can communicate with each other securely, and the active phased array antenna facilitates this. The F-35 uses the latest data link system, MADL, improving on the experiences learned with the F-22, allowing the F-35 to quickly share data securely from individual F-35s and ground-based systems. This information is then sorted by the computer and presented to the pilot in their heads-up display right in front of their eyes, giving them unparalleled situational awareness.
Everybody has their own firefight. In front of my position, there was this big solidified rock, I call it an anthill, and there were trees and shrubs all around it. And that was, and there were bad guys in the trees and around the side of the solidified rock position. It was my mission to knock that thing out. I told one of my men to shoot a bazooka. It was called a LAW, a light anti-tank weapon. It's a one-shot disposal weapon. You open it up and you put it on your shoulder and you fire, and it'll go through about 12 inches of steel. And it didn't work for him. It went off because of humidity and moisture. So rather than waste any more time, I took it from him and I reloaded it. I closed it up and opened it back up, and it went off for me. It made a big boom, and I thought we destroyed that thing, so we started going forward again.
We ran off the map the colonel had for us, and we came to a junction in the road we were on. One was going to the left to Sewell, to the right was to somewhere else. But there was a little hill right ahead of us, so we went up on that top of that hill, and on the circle of it, at the top, we all dug foxholes and orders to not fire on any enemy retreating, because we really didn't know where we were and we didn't want to start a fight. Shortly thereafter, we heard the clinking of enemy tanks retreating and coming up, and troops, and they paused right there in front of us. And my first thought was, well, here we go. But after a while, they decided that the signs were correct, so they went to the right to try to get out of South Korea and not be boxed in down there.
When I was wounded, it came in on an angle, it hit the scapula, it broke it, and it tore a big chunk, but my left arm was not working. And I couldn't move, but even if I couldn't move, the fire was such that if anybody that stood up got shot. It broke down to small groups of men fighting for the guy on their left, fighting for the guy on their right, unit discipline, and a lot of individual acts of courage. It hurt like hell. I never lost consciousness. I got to the aid station. We were short medics, but we had a captain doctor and 2 senior medics. They plugged me into IVs. Had lost a lot of blood, but hadn't lost consciousness. But I wasn't in any fighting shape.
Did you know in the movie Top Gun Maverick, there's an intense moment during the climax when Maverick tells Rooster to eject from their F-14 fighter jet, but nothing happens. This puzzling situation can be explained by a key detail about the F-14 aircraft. F-14 requires each chair to be armed in order for the seats to eject. This is a standard part of the jet's startup sequence, but Rooster wasn't properly trained to operate the F-14. It's completely understandable that he wouldn't know this specific procedure because he wasn't a qualified pilot for this aircraft. This situation could be seen as a plot point in the movie. On the other hand, it's also possible that this was a small oversight in the movie, where the details of the aircraft's operation were not accurately portrayed.
As time went on, and it took me many years to kind of feel proud. Because when you go to some of those crash sites, and you can't help, I think I let that feeling overshadow the good things that we did in terms of, I know those men and women were treated with dignity and respect, and we made sure that whatever parts and pieces and whatever dog tags and whatever other personal elements, we collected as much as we could to get that back to them. And there were some times where it was pretty sketchy because there was still some enemy in the area, but I think for me, it's like, I know this is what I would want, so I don't care. I don't care if enemies in the area. I don't care if it XYZ, maybe I should have cared, but at the time, I didn't. It was just more of like, how can we do right by these individuals?
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of motivation.
You can get discouraged a lot of ways, but the one surefire way to avoid discouragement, first of all, let's understand something. We're all participating in this thing called life. All of us. Life has ebb and flows. Mountaintops, it's got valleys. It's got thunderstorms in it, earthquakes. This life. Stop expecting it to go smooth, because it ain't finna go smooth. The road to success is always under construction. This life ain't set up to be smooth. You combat negativity and you combat discouragement with gratitude. It's the one way to combat discouragement is with gratitude. What messes you up is you focus on the thing that's not happening. And that causes you to get discouraged. So whenever you get discouraged, you have to change your focus from what's not happening to what has happened. And it straightens you out immediately. Because what causes the downslide is if you get wrapped up into what ain't happening, it get ugly, man. And it just snowballs. But you have to focus on gratitude. People don't understand how serious gratitude is. It's a serious principle of success. It's hard to be miserable and grateful at the same time. Joy and depression cannot reside in the same space. So when you get down and you start thinking about how dark it is, I want you to remember everything your mother taught you that was good. And that replaced all the negative thoughts I was having. Because joy and depression cannot reside in the same space. Well, now, you got to take that concept and apply it to your life. If joy and depression cannot reside in the same place, when you get depressed and you get discouraged, you got to replace it with joy. And what more joyous than gratitude? What has God done for you? Didn't you wake up today? Ain't you still breathing? Don't you have some measure of health? Ain't you working? You may not have the car you want, but don't you have a car? Ain't you eating groceries today? You ain't homeless? Now, when you start tripping and you get depressed, you got to go into yourself and come up with some gratitude. Once you get grateful, you can't be discouraged and grateful at the same time. You cannot do it. That's how you come back every single time. It happened to me the other day. I woke up, I just wasn't on the right side of the bed. Went downstairs and started doing my meditation. I pulled out a list of everything I'm grateful for. By the time I got to 13, I was fine. Because guess what? I'm alive, I'm breathing, I'm healthy. My grandkids is healthy, my children is healthy. That's how you do it. That's how you come back. I'm telling you, it works. It works. Just try it.
The minute you were born, you got involved in the war between good and evil, between darkness and light, between negative and positive, between evil and good, between tyranny and democracy, between weeds and human activity. I mean, the war is on. If democracy sleeps, guess who never sleeps? Tyranny. In the absence of light, guess what's automatic? Darkness. If good does not arouse itself and become active, guess what moves in? Evil. It's a war. A mental war, a physical war, a financial war, between enterprise and ease, between accomplishment and failure. It's a war.
The sun doesn't shine every day. The storms will come. There will be times when the darkness seems to consume everything. Even in the darkest times, even in the strongest storms, even when the sun is blotted out and the world is falling apart, the darkness cannot extinguish your light. You. Your will. That storm that you're in, from your perspective, it seems like that storm is enveloping the whole world. But I'm telling you, it is not. The storm that you're in, it is hard to see out of that storm. It's hard to see past it. It seems like the storm is everything. But the storm is not everything. And it won't last forever. You can get out of the storm, and you will get out of the storm. And when you get out, you're going to see the sun again. No matter what is happening, no matter how hard the fight is, as long as you keep fighting, you win. Only surrender is defeat. Only quitting is the end. Because the darkness only wins if you let it. Do not let the darkness win. Fight. Fight on. To fight against the darkness is to win. So fight on.
Now here's the good news about the war between good and evil. Evil is no match for good, but good must be active. Weeds are no match for human activity, but if you stand still, how far in will they come? All the way. But if you get busy, how far back can you take them? As far as you wish. They're no match, but you must be active.
And you keep fighting, and you keep fighting, and you keep fighting no matter what. And you never quit. You never quit. And if you feel like your life is in a place where you can't get any lower, and you don't think you can find any way out, good. because that means the ultimate challenge is ahead of you. It means you can only go up. But right now, you're being tried. You're being forged. You're being tested by fire and by pain. That's the test. Don't fail the test. Don't fail the test. Don't give in. Don't quit. Don't ever quit. Fight on. Fight through the storm. Fight through the pain and come out the other side stronger and free from that storm.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the daily law for April the 10th.
April 10th. Always say less than necessary. Undutiful words of a subject do often take deeper root than the memory of ill deeds. Sir Walter Raleigh. When you are trying to impress people with words, the more you say, the more common you appear, and the less in control. Even if you are saying something banal, it will seem original if you make it vague, open-ended, and sphinx-like. Powerful people impress and intimidate by saying less. The more you say, the more likely you are to say something foolish. Daily law. By saying less than necessary, you create the appearance of meaning and power. Also, the less you say, the less risk you run of saying something foolish, even dangerous. The 48 Laws of Power, Law 4. Always say less than necessary.
And that was the daily law for April the 10th from the book The Daily Laws by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
So for a lot of people, maybe listening to me right now, you say, yeah, at one point in my life, I was really excited about religious things. And I was excited about the Lord. But then I didn't cultivate it. And then what does the Lord say here? Some tribulation or persecution comes. Well, yeah, it always happens, doesn't it? Some difficulty, tribulation, someone attacks me, someone makes fun of me. You got to cultivate the seed, everybody. Day in and day out, season in and season out. When it's fun to do so, when it's not fun to do so. Otherwise, it'll fade away.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "It is at a time like this, in the face of an approaching economic collapse, that the intellectuals are preaching egalitarian notions. When the curtailment of government spending is imperative, they demand more welfare projects. When the need for men of productive ability is desperate, they demand more equality for the incompetents. When the country needs the accumulation of capital, they demand that we soak the rich. When the country needs more savings, they demand a redistribution of income. They demand more jobs and less profit, more jobs and fewer factories, more jobs and no fuel, no oil, no coal, no pollution, but, above all, more goods for free to more consumers, no matter what happens to jobs, to factories, or to producers." Unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now we'll pick up where we left off with the 33 strategies of war.
Here are further reflections on the exit strategy. From the I Ching. If one overshoots the goal, one cannot hit it. If a bird will not come to its nest but flies higher and higher, it eventually falls into the hunter's net. He who in times of extraordinary salience of small things does not know how to call a halt, but restlessly seeks to press on and on, draws upon himself misfortune at the hands of gods and men, because he deviates from the order of nature. By Tacitus. They create desolation and call it peace. From All's Well That Ends Well, by William Shakespeare. All's well that ends well, still the fine's the crown. Whate'er the course, the end is the renown. From The Great Arab Conquests, by John Bagot Glubb. 10,000 Muslims then marched through the mountain valleys upon Mecca. Muhammad divided his force into 4 columns. Muhammad gave strict orders that no violence was to be used. His own tent was pitched on high ground immediately overlooking the town. 8 years before, he had fled from Mecca under cover of darkness and lain hidden 3 days in a cave on Mount Thor, which from his tent he could now see rising beyond the city. Now 10,000 warriors were ready to obey his least command, and his native town lay helpless at his feet. After a brief rest, he remounted his camel and entered the town, reverently touched the black stone, and performed the 7 ritual circuits of the Kaaba. Muhammad the Conqueror was not vindictive. A general amnesty was proclaimed, from which less than a dozen persons were excluded, only 4 being actually executed. Ikrimah, the son of Abu Jahal, escaped to the Yemen, but his wife appealed to the apostle, who agreed to forgive him. The Muslim occupation of Mecca was thus virtually bloodless. The fiery Khalid ibn al-Walid killed a few people at the southern gate and was sharply reprimanded by Muhammad for doing so. Although the apostle had himself been persecuted in the city, and although many of his bitterest opponents were still living there, he won all hearts by his clemency on his day of triumph. Such generosity, or statesmanship, was particularly remarkable among Arabs, a race to whom revenge has always been dear. His success had been won by policy and diplomacy rather than by military action. In an age of violence and bloodshed, he had realized that ideas are more powerful than force. By Ovid. Either don't attempt it, or carry it through to the end. From Strategy, by B.H. Little Hart. Indeed, deepening study of past experience leads to the conclusion that nations might often have come nearer to their object by taking advantage of a lull in the struggle to discuss a settlement than by pursuing the war with the aim of victory. History reveals also that in many cases a beneficial peace could have been obtained if the statesmen of the warring nations had shown more understanding of the elements of psychology in their peace feelers. Their attitude has commonly been too akin to that seen in the typical domestic quarrel. Each party is afraid to appear yielding, with the result that when one of them shows any inclination toward conciliation, this is usually expressed in language that is too stiff, while the other is apt to be slow to respond, partly from pride or obstinacy, and partly from a tendency to interpret such a gesture as a sign of weakening, when it may be a sign of returning common sense. Thus, the fateful moment passes, and conflict continues, to the common damage. Rarely does a continuation serve any good purpose where the 2 parties are bound to go on living under the same roof. This applies even more to modern war than to domestic conflict, since the industrialization of nations has made their fortunes inseparable. From Strategy, by B.H. Little Hart. If you concentrate exclusively on victory, with no thought for the after effect, You may be too exhausted to profit by the peace, while it is almost certain that the peace will be a bad one, containing the germs of another war. This is a lesson supported by abundant experience. From On War by Karl von Clausewitz. It is even possible that the attacker, reinforced by the psychological forces peculiar to attack, will, in spite of his exhaustion, find it less difficult to go on than to stop, like a horse pulling a load uphill. We believe that this demonstrates without inconsistency how an attacker can overshoot the point at which, if he stopped and assumed the defensive, there would still be a chance of success, that is, of equilibrium. It is therefore important to calculate this point correctly when planning the campaign. An attacker may otherwise take on more than he can manage, and as it were get into debt. A defender must be able to recognize this error if the enemy commits it, and exploit it to the full. In reviewing the whole array of factors a general must weigh before making his decision, we must remember that he can gauge the direction and value of the most important ones only by considering numerous other possibilities, some immediate, some remote. He must guess, so to speak. Guess whether the first shock of battle will steel the enemy's resolve and stiffen his resistance, or whether, like a Bologna flask, it will shatter as soon as its surface is scratched. Guess the extent of debilitation and paralysis that the drying up of the particular sources of supply and the severing of certain lines of communication will cause in the enemy. Guess whether the burning pain of the injury he has been dealt will make the enemy collapse with exhaustion, or, like a wounded bull, arouse his rage. Guess whether the other powers will be frightened or indignant, and whether and which political alliances will be dissolved or formed. When we realize that he must hit upon all this and much more by means of his discreet judgment, as a marksman hits a target, we must admit that such an accomplishment of the human mind is no small achievement. Thousands of wrong turns running in all directions tempt his perception. And if the range, confusion, and complexity of the issues are not enough to overwhelm him, the dangers and responsibilities may. This is why the great majority of generals will prefer to stop well short of their objective rather than risk approaching it too closely, and why those with high courage and an enterprising spirit will often overshoot it and so fail to attain their purpose. Only the man who can achieve great results with limited means has really hit the mark. From The Mind of War by Grant T. Hammond. The great prize fighter Jack Dempsey was once asked, "When you are about to hit a man, do you aim for his chin or his nose?" "Neither," Dempsey replied. "I aim for the back of his head." From the I Ching. Victory seems to have been achieved. There remains merely a remnant of the evil, resolutely to be eradicated as the time demands. Everything looks easy. Just there, however, lies the danger. If we are not on guard, evil will succeed in escaping by means of concealment. And when it has eluded us, new misfortunes will develop from the remaining seeds, for evil does not die easily. From The General's War, the inside story of the conflict in the Gulf, by Michael R. Gordon and General Bernard E. Traynor. CENTCOM's lightning war, Desert Storm, was over. It had been billed as a 100-hour blitz, but 3 years later it was still an unfinished war. Recalled Gordon Brown, the Foreign Service officer who served as Schwarzkopf's chief foreign policy advisor at CENTCOM, "We never did have a plan to terminate the war."
And that was the end of Chapter 22, Know How to End Things, from the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you need to vote Republican and become a Republican because President Biden is not only the face of the country, the leader of the country, but he is the titular head of the Democrat Party. And what he does reflects on the Democrat Party and everybody in it. So right now, the Democrat Party is a party that wanders around not knowing where it's going, what it's doing, or what it's saying. It is brain-addled. And you, as a voter, deserve better. That's why you need to vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of Varney's My Take.
By the way, the Dow right at a 2-year low. And look at that, the 10-year Treasury, real close to 4.5%, up 13 basis points. In the bond market, that's a huge upside move in the yield. The 2-year Treasury, look at that, 4.96. Earlier, it had crossed over 5%. Not good for the stock market. Bitcoin, 68,000 and small change. That's the markets on this Wednesday morning. And now this. The president says Trump is a threat to democracy. Now, that's one of the main themes of his campaign. He's basing this claim on January the 6th. And, of course, he jumps on Trump's statement that only on day one would he be a dictator. Trump was being sarcastic, but Biden chooses to ignore that in the interest of political spin. So who really is a threat to democracy? How about this? The constant demonstrations from pro-Palestinian, frankly, pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic protesters who disrupt our politics. Tuesday, they shut down parts of the Senate. Democracy implies free debate. This crowd, and they're all in the Democrat Party, interrupt debate. They interrupt democracy. How about Tarek Bazi, who publicly calls for death to America, death to Israel at a demonstration in Dearborn, Michigan, America's home turf? I would have thought that was a threat to democracy, but Biden won't come out publicly and condemn it. Where is he? And then there's student loan forgiveness. The Supreme Court has already rejected it, but Biden says he will ignore that. Since when, in our democracy, is it okay to ignore a Supreme Court verdict? There's the border. You're not defending democracy when you ignore existing law and let 10 million illegals into the country. Then taxpayers fly them around to states that don't want them and can't afford to support them. This undermines democracy. Is Biden defending democracy if he insists on voting rules that allow elections to run on forever, complete with packs of lawyers dragging everything out? He's asking for trouble for democracy, that is. Something's not right here. Biden has embarked on a desperate campaign, painting his opponent as a threat to democracy. Frankly, he should look in the mirror. Second hour of Varney just warming up.
And that was the My Take. And so the again, with the Biden versus Donald Trump is the only candidate that deserves his party's nomination and deserves to be elected president of the United States. Joe Biden does not deserve it. He is sick. He is ill. He needs to resign the office immediately. He needs to suspend his campaign, go home, and get better. Get well. Once you've gotten well, and then you want to go ahead and run for a second term, please do so. Until then, like I said, get out of the way. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the management of the absurd.
The notion that people need to communicate more is perhaps the most widely accepted idea in management, indeed in all human relationships. Whether it's called counseling, team building, conflict resolution, or negotiating, it all boils down to one idea. That is, if we talk it over, things will get better. Well, yes and no. I certainly won't say that we don't need to talk, but communication, like everything else in human affairs, seldom works the way we think it does. Most organizations, in fact, are over-communicating. Meetings, conferences, memos, phone calls, and electronic mail overwhelm managers and employees alike. Increasingly, we seem to believe that everybody should be in on everything. But complete and accurate communication can be quite boring. In one management training exercise, often done to demonstrate both the difficulty and the importance of achieving accurate communication, participants are not allowed to speak unless they first satisfy the previous speaker that his or her remarks were fully understood. This is done by repeating the previous speaker's message, not in a parroting way, but in one's own words, and then obtaining his or her agreement that the summation is accurate. Not surprisingly, this agreement is often hard to get. Eventually, participants learn the necessity and value of careful listening. When the experiment is continued beyond a few minutes, however, it begins to wear on the participants. Even though the heat has gone out of the discussion and people are fully understanding each other, an enormous amount of boredom sets in. Accurate communication has become both tedious and stifling. The exercise reminds us that the transfer of accurate information is only a small part of the role communication plays in our lives. Many supposed communication problems are actually balance of power problems. That's why it probably is unwise to introduce completely open communication into a situation in which there is a large disparity in power. The unintended but damaging result is to increase the power of the already powerful and reduce the power of the already powerless. For example, in marriage counseling, if the person who feels rejected is asked to communicate his or her needs to the person doing the rejecting, it can actually worsen matters by making the rejected person even less attractive and more vulnerable to the other person. The same is true in boss-employee relationships. When subordinates are asked to communicate honestly with their superiors, they run the risk of becoming more vulnerable, with potentially harmful consequences. One wonders how many people there are, like the one woman I know, who was encouraged by her associates to go to her boss and clear the air. She did, and was fired soon afterward. It's only when the balance of power is relatively equal that truly candid communication can and should take place. When we witness a red-faced executive shouting, "Who's excited? I'm not excited," we realize that the feeling is much more important than the words. That's why, in all communication, it's crucial to listen to the music as well as the lyrics, the feeling behind the words as well as the words themselves. It's vital to remember that in communication, form is more important than content. We're well aware that a written message carries more weight than a spoken one, and among written messages, one that's printed is weightier than one that is typed, which is weightier than one that's handwritten, even though the words may be identical. The mode of expression, it would seem, is more important than the words. We all realize, for example, that when a telephone call to a company is answered by a receptionist with a British accent, that person is likely to convey an image of being unusually intelligent and better organized, creating a positive impression of the corporation itself. Indeed, the idea of corporate image conveyed in letterheads, annual reports, advertising, and even buildings is a triumph of form over content. One of the most subtle examples of this phenomenon is something I call meta-messages. They tend to be invisible, but are nevertheless indelible. Consider, for instance, the hidden curriculum of a school as described by social critic Ivan Illich. We're all aware that adults do not retain much of what they were taught in school as children. Most of us could not pass a 7th grade history exam or calculate a square root, even though we once could. But we all retain what was taught in the hidden curriculum. We learned to sit still, raise our hands, wait in line, obey adult authority, and ask permission. We also learned that teachers tend to be women and administrators men, that there are things we can talk about and things we shouldn't, and so forth. We never forgot these lessons because they were taught not as part of the actual curriculum, but rather by the ritual or form of education. Each was a meta-message. In all of life, the meta-message tends to be more powerful than the message itself. I see this in management training programs in particular. The very existence of such programs conveys the mistaken message, even for those people who don't take the training, that management is a skill that can be taught and learned quickly. But effective management is not a matter of acquiring skills. There are many ways to do the job. When the meta-messages of management training programs say otherwise, an impossible burden is imposed on even seasoned managers. Invariably, their newly acquired skills desert them. They end up feeling inadequate and obliged to take action, any action, with sometimes regrettable consequences. For another example of form over content, look at how we arrange ourselves at business meetings. Now, there's a great difference between sitting at the customary oblong table with the leader at the head and sitting around a circular table at which no distinction is made for the leader. The same people with the same agenda may be seated at both tables, but a very different meeting ensues. If the table is removed and people are seated in a circle of chairs exposed to each other, the meeting will also be predictably different. It will become even more different if people remove their jackets and ties, and still more different if they take off their shoes and sit on the floor. At each of these stages, the discussion becomes less formal, more participative, more personal. Nothing has changed except the form, and yet because of that, everything has changed. We're only too well aware of the meta-messages in the design of an office. Almost anyone will become more intimidating when they sit in a large corner office with carpeting, an expansive desk, a leather chair with a high back, and other symbols of executive authority. Often, we may be so concerned about the content of what we say or write that we forget the form. Yet the feelings, the rituals, the arrangements, the social and physical design, all that's implied by the way we organize and communicate an experience, are crucially important. When they are taken into account, it's possible to send meta-messages that are consonant with the intended message and reinforce rather than undermine it. Here's an idea that many managers have trouble with. Praising people does not motivate them. I have long questioned the cherished notion that people work better after being praised. I realize that here I am in unfriendly territory because praise is perhaps the most widely used and thoroughly endorsed of all human relations techniques. Parents, managers, psychologists, teachers, everyone seems to believe in its value as a motivational tool, a reward, a way to establish good relationships. We value it because we have all experienced the thrill of discovering that someone we respect thinks highly of us. But I doubt that praise, when consciously employed as a management technique, always accomplishes quite what we think it does. Not that it doesn't have valuable functions, of which we're largely unaware, I guess, but I think our beliefs about its motivational value need closer scrutiny. Consider the following. Praise may, in fact, be perceived as threatening. Watch how people respond to praise. Don't they often react with discomfort or uneasiness? A very common response is a vague denial or derogation. I really can't take the credit for it, or you're just saying that. Praise a house or garden and its owner may hasten to point out its defects. Praise an employee for a project and that person is sometimes quick to play down his or her role in it. The defensiveness is compounded, of course, when the praise is unearned or undeserved. People react defensively because in praise there can be threat. After all, praise is an evaluation, and to be evaluated, to be judged, usually makes us uncomfortable, even if the evaluation is positive. Additionally, when you praise people, you're often trying to motivate them, to move them in certain directions, to change them. The threat of change is nearly always disquieting. Instead of reassuring people about their worth, praise may be a way of gaining status over them. Giving praise establishes the fact that you are in a position to sit in judgment. A manager evaluating an employee needs to be sensitive to this. Even if the evaluation is positive, the employee can end up feeling diminished if it seems the manager is merely reinforcing his or her status. Interestingly, when the work of a high-status person is praised by a low-status person, it's often seen as presumptuous or even insulting. If an ordinary person were to have told Picasso, "You're a very good painter," that compliment would not likely have been particularly well received. In order to be acceptable, the praise must be given in a way that respects the status difference. "I love your painting." Praise may constrict creativity rather than free it. Some actions by managers are intended as rewards, like salaries and benefits, but because the employee has come to take them for granted, they no longer function as rewards. That can also be true with praise. When we demand it, and it is routinely given, it no longer serves to motivate us. What really does release creativity and promote achievement is when a manager takes the time to get involved in the employee's work. Learning what direction the work is taking, the problems and possibilities it presents, the way the employee is dealing with the task. But involvement is demanding and time-consuming, which probably explains why many managers resort to praise as a substitute, hoping that it will accomplish the same results. Praise can come to be associated mainly with criticism. This happens when we use praise to sugarcoat blame, or employ the sandwich technique, whereby praise is followed by reproof, then repeated. "I'm very pleased with your work, Fred," says the boss. "You're really getting the work out, but," Fred then hears the unhappy part of the story, the reprimand. The boss finishes up with, "Keep up the fine work," and Fred is shuttled out without quite knowing what hit him. This is also a favorite technique of parents and teachers, and we've become so conditioned by its use from early childhood that when we're praised, we automatically get ready for the shock, the reproof.
And that was from Chapter 1 of Management of the Absurd by Richard Farson. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.